to record to the cloud.
Okay, starting now.
I'm just starting now. I can edit it later. Yep.
Right, you are. Okay, recording. And I'll sit on the questions.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay. So yeah, Tara, if you make me the host again,
You should be host by now. Let me
am I?
see.
Okay.
I think you are.
Okay. You're reviewing. Okay. Stop participants sharing. Oh, there you go. I have power. Okay. All right. So I think we are good. Everybody good on this end?
I'm just what I look like in the video. This laptop is dying. Oh, I look terrible.
Here we go. Now we can see it, Paul.
There you go, Paul. All right. Well, I'm going to start sharing my screen in presentation mode, and I'm going to start the webinar.
All right, let's go.
All right. Let's see. All right, we're starting to get people trickling in here. We're going to give it a few minutes as people jump on. Hi, Richard. Hi, Lyle. There we go. People are trickling in, so it always takes a few minutes for people to load in from the waiting room. So we'll give it a few minutes before we properly kick off.
We got some blocks on the screen for your.
Did that move, Paul?
Okay, now it's better. Yes.
Okay. So those are the menu blocks, like the participants with the screen sharing. Good. Okay. All right, everybody, we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. So just letting people trickle in as Zoom loads, cues everybody into the active webinar. All right. Well, I think Zoom is still queuing people in, but we try to keep these running on as close to on time as we can because nobody has more time for excess Zoom these days. So welcome everybody to our November Clean Tech North meeting. We've got some great content for you today. So quickly, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors. Export Development Canada, EDC, Flow Ventures, City of Toronto, and the City of Toronto Startup Here program in particular. I'm going to say a few words, but I'll keep it as short as I can. Then we'll be passing it over to Terry from Apex Capital, and then to Howie Honeyman from Forward Water. Again, thank you to our sponsors. Who did I leave out there? So we've left out RBC, Climate Ventures, CSI, and Goodman's. My apologies there, Richard. So thank you very much to all of our partners and sponsors. And again, thank you to the Startup Here program. We're probably going to be doing another round of these showcases, by the way, on the Startup Here blog, talking about some of what the art of the possible is in terms of clean technology, and featuring some of the Toronto-based companies such as you see Peak Power here, Bear Tech, and Remy from Pantonium. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out to Paul or I. We'll see if we can coordinate those showcases. Quick word. I don't know if we have anybody from the board. Probably we've got Richard on the. I see here for sure. But quick word on the Ontario Clean Tech Industry Association. We're still accepting members. We just had our first AGM, and I won't go into all the details, but there's been a lot of work done on the policy side. Thank you, Richard and Peter MacArthur in particular for driving a lot of that policy work on the clean tech side, working with Canada Clean Tech and a lot of work done with the federal government. So please do take a look at the Ontario Clean Tech Industry Association and join us. So without further ado, because we do want to stay on time, it's actually quite a pleasure to introduce Terry Materniak from Apex Capital. I've known Terry for, as he just put it, for 2 startups, plus a few angel groups in there along the way. So I'll let him give you his proper bio. But Terry has, I've known Terry for quite a while, and he has built out Apex Capital Partners, and certainly has a few war wounds and scars that he's able to help entrepreneurs and companies avoid and benefit from on the M&A side. So with that, Terry, why don't I pass it over to you? I think you can take. I'll stop sharing my screen, and I believe you can start sharing yours now. Let me know if you have any trouble. There you go. Oh, nope, that's me.
You guys can see my screen?
Perfect. Yep. You're in slide mode. If you hit presentation, it should work fine.
Let's see. Okay. Everything is good. You can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay,
Perfect.
good. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the intro. So just by a little bit of by way of background. So I'm a startup guy. I've done 3 startups, 2 in the clean tech space. That's how I know Brian, because he started working with me doing shred stuff 2 startups ago, I think. And then I founded Apex about a year ago, just in the middle of beginning of the pandemic, almost a year ago. So Apex is a lower mid-market investment bank. So we do mostly M&A work. So we buy companies, sell companies. Occasionally we will raise capital, do some advisory work. And then, but we have a strong focus on tech as a general space, but in particular clean tech. So I've got a couple mandates in the clean tech space right now. We're helping companies get sold. So that's kind of what we do. We work with companies as small as $5 million in revenue to as big as 50 million and everything in between. So that's the background on Apex. Here, I'm just going to scroll over. So really what we want to cover today, and we only have half an hour, and I normally do a version of this workshop in about an hour. But we're going to cover the basics of the M&A process. For this workshop's really geared for founders that have never been through a sale or an acquisition transaction. So it's kind of the nuts and bolts of M&A. So how to prepare your company for an exit, how to value your business and structure a transaction. We'll talk a little bit about engaging professional advisors, some strategies on bridging valuation gaps, and then just other basic things like letter of intent, due diligence, legal documentation, stuff like that. So we're going to whip through this pretty quickly, but at the end or afterwards, I'd be happy to chat with any of the members just on a one-on-one call, or you can ask questions at the end if you want. Happy to accommodate that. So if you've never sold your business before, there's a lot of things to think about. First of all, what are your financial objectives? And most people will say, well, I want to get the most money for my business, but that's not always a black and white answer. There's emotional issues related to whether you're truly ready to part with your baby. Do you care whether you get the highest price for your company or the most cash? And those are often very different numbers, because most transactions are structured in a way that there's a combination of cash, stock sometimes, an earn out, consulting contracts. There's lots of ways to structure a deal. It's rarely 100% cash. So you got to think about some of those things. And I think the biggest thing is you got to figure out what role do you want to play in the business going forward. Do you care what the acquirer does with your company? Do you care what the acquirer does with your employees? Are you ready to hang in there for a year or 2 or 3 years? And then the other thing we always tell people is, if you're thinking of a succession plan or selling your company, you need to start thinking about that somewhere between 1 and 2 years of when you want to exit. Don't, say I want to exit and I want to get it sold in 3 months, because that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And in many cases, companies have to pretty themselves up or reposition themselves a little bit to maximize value on an exit or on a transaction. So again, we cover a lot of these things a bit later in the presentation. So this is, believe it or not, this is a shortened version of the M&A process. I do another version of this webinar where there's, I think, another 4 or 5 steps beyond this. But generally, when we're engaged to sell a company, we develop a profile of the target sort of ideal acquirers. We do some initial outreach and create an anonymous teaser document. We'll talk about some of these documents later. Then you sign an NDA. Then you sign something that's called an expression of interest. And only after those first 4 or 5 steps do management meetings actually happen. The biggest mistake most companies make is they let acquirers go straight to due diligence and start to chew up an enormous amount of management's time before they're really serious. So again, this is a bit of a gated process. It's a tried and true process that most M&A transactions go through. But of course, there can be variations, and we'll go through some of these things in a little more detail. So what we mean by preparing your company for a sale is there's lots of nuts and bolts things you have to do to be buttoned down. Cleaning up the balance sheet. In other words, not having non-collectible receivables, or having your equity to debt ratios in line, reducing some of your long-term debt, just basic things to clean up liabilities. Certainly, if there's any legal issues, a disgruntled employee or any litigation, you probably want to clean that up way in advance. What buyers get spooked of is when they start due diligence and they find ghosts in the closet. As soon as you erode that credibility on due diligence, you're dead. They're either going to ask for a massive discount or they're going to turn and run the other way. So, I think being well prepared from a due diligence perspective in advance of engaging in a transaction will serve you very well. There's other ways you can just improve the bottom line, improve your margins and operational efficiencies. You may decide not to invest in big capital expenditures that may not pay dividends for 2 or 3 years. So it's really, I don't want to say putting lipstick on the pig, but prettying up the girl for the dance, and driving sales and improving margins and driving that bottom line. As long as it's in a sustainable manner, buyers will quickly see through a short-term, suffocation of cash to the company to drive bottom line. So it's got to be something that makes sense. The other thing I think you really need to start thinking about is who is the ideal acquirer, whether they're a private equity firm or a strategic buyer, and you need to start to align your business with those strategic buyers. By align the business, it may be positioning your products from a technology platform standpoint. It could be developing sales channels that are synergistic with that potential buyer. It could be opening up in geographic territories where they may be weak. And that often happens. American companies will come into Canada, and it's just easier to buy a company than it is to launch in a new country, right? So, little things like that. And the other thing that's a big gotcha is if there's a giant gap between the CEO and the next level of management, if you ever want to get out of the business, you better find a succession plan. So you need to start thinking about grooming successors or putting a layer of management in beneath the CEO so that there's a logical transition if you want to get out a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road after a transaction. So there's lots and lots of other things you can do to prepare your company for a sale, but these are kind of the basics. So valuation, most people are asking, what's my company worth? Now, technology companies, especially in the early stage, are valued very differently than this metric. Technology companies are often valued at a multiple of revenues, whereas more mature companies are generally valued at a multiple of EBITDA. So ballparkish, most companies are worth 4 or 5 times your EBITDA number. But again, that's just a kind of a median figure. There's lots of different factors that affect what the multiple will be. Your growth rates of the business. If you're growing 5% a year, you're going to be valued very differently than a company that's growing 50% a year. because growth rates have a huge impact on the valuation. Future revenue potential, if you're developing new products or new markets or new revenue models, those get factored in. And then other basic things like economic conditions, risk factors associated with your business. Tech product companies and tech companies get valued much higher than pure service businesses. And then we look at other things like market comps. What have other people paid for comparable businesses in your industry? And also what stage in the life cycle of the business your company is in. If you are on the growth trajectory, then you're valued one way. If it's a mature or even declining industry, like oil and gas these days, then you're valued very differently, right? So all of these factors have an impact on the valuation multiple. And a multiple of EBITDA isn't the only way to value companies. Companies can be valued based on assets. They can be valued based on their technology or their IP. But generally, it's a multiple of revenues or a multiple of EBITDA, depending on what stage you are and how technology focused your business is. Okay, so how do you structure a deal? How are deals financed? Rare, no, I don't want to say rarely, but generally it's not 100% cash on closing. So sorry to burst the bubble of some folks that are thinking that might happen, but generally it's a whole series of different components. There's certainly a cash component on closing, but sometimes buyers will ask the vendor or the founder or the principal shareholders to take back a note over a period of time. And that's not always a bad thing because those carry a nice little coupon, as well as if the buyer can finance a part of the purchase price over 2 or 3 years, they'll be more likely to pay a higher valuation. So sometimes there's a discount applied to an all cash deal. Sometimes they'll want to pay you a portion of the purchase price in shares or stock of the buyer. But beware, you really don't want to be putting all your eggs in a non-cash basket, so to speak, and just take stock, because if things go south, then you may end up giving away your business for nothing. And then earnouts are a very common way to structure a deal. And what we mean by earnout is you may think the company is worth $10 million or $15 million, and the buyer may think it's only worth 10. The way they bridge that valuation gap is to say, okay, we'll pay you 10 right now. And if your company meets these certain milestones that you've laid out in your own financial forecasts, then we'll pay you 15 million over 2 or 3 years. So we'll pay you the balance over 2 or 3 years. But that's of course going to require the founder to be engaged with the business for a couple of years. So again, lots of ways to structure deals and be creative. And cash isn't the only way to compensate founders. So there's 3 ways to buy a business. One is a share purchase, where the buyer purchases 100% or some percentage of the shares of the company. There's an asset purchase where they literally pluck assets out of the company, buy the certain assets only, and can leave the remaining assets in the corporate entity or in the corporate shell. And then there's business combinations or mergers or amalgamations. But again, those are more often done with public companies or larger organizations. And there's pros and cons to each of these structures. So in an asset sale, the buyers generally will prefer an asset sale because they pose less risk. They can cherry pick only the assets they want, and they don't really have to worry too much about hidden risks or hidden liabilities because those reside with the company. The disadvantage to sellers is you may be left with assets, redundant assets or liabilities. It's certainly less tax advantageous because you can't take advantage of the capital gains exemption. And then there's other things like contracts, supply agreements have to be assignable. So there are a few more hoops you got to go through to sell the assets in a deal. In a share sale, generally sellers prefer a share sale for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're buying the whole kit and caboodle. All the assets, all the liabilities go with the buyer. And it's also far more tax advantageous. So as a capital gain, assuming you're what's called a CCPC, which is a Canadian controlled private corporation, only 50% of the gain is taxable. And also for CCPCs, you get a lifetime capital gains exemption of $866,000. So if it's your first time selling a business, you definitely want to be selling shares to take advantage of all these exemptions. The buyers, again, it's more work to buy the shares, but it's a little more disadvantageous because you've got to acquire all of the business, including all the liabilities and ghosts in the closet. So that's the downside. So every transaction is different. I'd say 70% of transactions are share sales, but definitely not 100% go that route. So professional advisors, there's more than just your corporate lawyer as your advisor on this and your accountant. And I think if you're thinking of selling your business, you need to start building your roster of advisors early. And the big benefit in having an M&A advisor or an investment bank on your team is this is what they do for a living. This is what they do all day long, and they can help take the heavy burden of selling your business off of your plate and allow you to run the business. Many entrepreneurs make the mistake of trying to sell the business themselves, and you can do it, and some who've done it before can do it, but it's extraordinarily time consuming. And the last thing you want to do is take your eye off the ball and have your business start to decline as you're trying to sell it. Okay. So, and the other benefit in having advisors is it takes a lot of the emotion out of this. This can be a very emotionally draining experience, and objective advisors can play a huge role in just being a buffer between you and the purchaser. And at the end of the day, it's business, but because you've invested 5, 10, 20 years of your life building the company, it can get very emotional. So to me, you really should build a team of advisors, which includes an M&A lawyer, which is different from a general corporate lawyer. There are lawyers that just specialize in M&A transactions. You need accountants, but you also need tax advisors specifically. Getting an M&A advisor would make a lot of sense. And in some cases, you want to engage your wealth management advisor because they often provide sort of tax planning strategies. And if you're about to come into a bucket load of cash, you better do it in the most tax advantageous way you can. So I think it's really important to start building that team of advisors early. So in that process flow diagram we talked about, there's sort of a selling package that you need to build, especially if you're going to go out and do what's called a managed process, which is going out and reaching out to multiple targets and trying to create a bit of an auction or a bidding process. But generally, the package consists of an anonymous teaser or executive summary. There's a kind of a business overview or pitch deck that you would use for a management meeting presentation. But the core of the selling package is what we would call a confidential information memorandum or a deal book. And this is a 50, 60, 70 slide deck that talks about the entire business. You should be able to solicit a term sheet on the strength of an information memorandum without ever meeting with a buyer face to face. And that's generally the way we would run the process. And then there's your financial package. And that's not just historical financial statements. That's got to include, budgets, 3 to 5 year forecasts, in some cases, a financial model that will layer in, new products, new revenue streams, acquisitions, new channels, things like that. So there's a fair bit of work involved in creating a comprehensive package. And in many cases, it's tough for a company to do that on their own while they're still running their day-to-day business. So the next step is getting what's called an expression of interest, or in some cases, what's called an EOI or an IOI. And this is just a written statement from the buyer that they're interested in acquiring the business. And typically this happens after they've seen the full confidential information memorandum. So again, they haven't met management yet, or maybe they've had a call with them, but they haven't done a deep dive, and they definitely haven't had access to the virtual data room or due diligence. So many buyers want to bypass this step, but it's important to try and hold your ground here. And it's just an expression of interest. They'll likely say, we think your company is worth between X and Y. This is kind of the structure we're thinking about, but it's important to get them to put a stake in the ground before you, pardon the expression, pull up your skirt and give them access to the entire due diligence, which is comprehensive, because now you're showing them everything, and you really don't want to give them that kind of access unless they've at least put a bit of a stake in the ground. And again, this is just the first volley in the negotiation process, so don't get discouraged. As long as it's within the ballpark of your high and low, or your low, then it's certainly grounds for moving forward. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, there's lots of ways to sort of bridge this valuation gap. Sometimes it's a vendor take back, or it's a note. Most deals have earnouts, so be expecting some sort of earnout to try and get you to a higher valuation number. Sometimes private equity firms will buy less than 100%. A strategic buyer will generally want to buy only 100%. They're really not interested in a minority stake, or even 50, 60, 70%. But a private equity firm sometimes will buy just a controlling stake, and we'll pump some capital into the business, and we'll want management to come along for the ride, which is good because there's an opportunity for management to participate in some of the upside. And as we mentioned earlier, sometimes the purchase price is paid with stock. Sometimes they can engage management in, I would say, lucrative consulting contracts or bonus programs. So there's lots of ways to bridge those valuation gaps. Okay, and only after you've gone through all of those steps do you generally get together for face-to-face management meetings. Sometimes they happen earlier, and sometimes some of those steps are bypassed or accelerated, especially with strategic buyers. But generally, you want to push off the face-to-face management meetings until you've got someone that is serious and not just kicking the tires. So the important point here is not to let the buyer drive the process as much as you would think that's the way it would go. This is the seller's opportunity to put their best forward. So the management meeting presentations have to be very carefully orchestrated to articulate your value proposition, and most importantly, the strategic fit with the buyer, and really why you think the company is worth X dollars, which is the purchase price you want. So and this is where the chemistry fit is important, because if you're going to be involved with the buyer for 2 or 3 years on an earnout or something like that, you better make sure the chemistry is good and it's not going to be a disaster. And I've been through it personally, where I've sold the business, and the year or two after selling the business was hell with the wrong buyer. So sometimes it's just, you got to make sure the culture is correct, and culture is really, really important. So in a really post-management meeting, the goal is to get to a detailed letter of intent or term sheet. So this is the term sheet. So this will enumerate pretty much all of the business terms of the deal: purchase price, structure, and the role of management, employment agreements, earnouts. They tend to cover some major reps and warranties, but you have to resist the temptation, or your lawyers have to resist the temptation of making this into a full-blown purchase agreement. So term sheets should not be 14 pages. They should be 3 or 5 pages, and that's about it. So it's really the general business terms. And don't forget, this is still a non-binding letter of intent, but it's much more detailed than the original expression of interest. And then only once you've signed the term sheet do you go into due diligence. And due diligence can be exhausting and extraordinarily time-consuming. Typically, buyers say they can do their due diligence in 30 days. That almost never happens. And some buyers will have an entire due diligence team. I sold one of my companies to a division of Siemens. They had 18 people on their due diligence team. So it can be an overwhelming exercise. Normally it takes 60 to 90 days, but you also don't want it to spill over beyond that period because time is your enemy. The longer a deal takes and the more fur it has on it, the less likely it's gonna be to close. So the number one takeaway here is be ready in advance. Don't be building the data room the day that you've signed the term sheet, because it may take you a month just to build the data room properly. So you really need to be buttoned down early in the process. And I'm just going to try and zip through these last few slides. So really the next step is a definitive purchase agreement. That's the main document. It's a purchase agreement that covers all the reps and warranties, all the business terms, indemnities, escrows, holdbacks, all those things. So again, it's important that you're well prepared and that you have an experienced M&A lawyer. Again, a generalist corporate lawyer is really not equipped to do these types of transactions. So you really got to find someone that does M&A for a living. Okay, and some of the most common mistakes in the M&A process. One is letting things get emotional, and trust me, it happens. So there's the value in having objective third-party advisors. The other common mistake that entrepreneurs make is asking for a higher valuation, which you're entitled to, but without providing a strong rationale for it. You can't just say, I want a higher valuation because. So you really, if you're going to ask for a higher valuation, you need to build an economic analysis or an ROI type of calculation that will paint the picture of why the company is worth more than they think it is. Other ones are, as we mentioned, being ill prepared for due diligence, not having your financial house in order. You know, don't just be relying on, financial statements spit out of QuickBooks without having an accounting firm reviewing them. So you really need to have your financial statements in good order. And the biggest one is do not hide ghosts in the closet. Our buyers will find those issues in due diligence. And as soon as you erode your credibility, you're dead. The deal will die unequivocally. So really try and be transparent and forthright throughout the due diligence process. Then the other one that you have to be careful about is leaking information to staff or customers. So I think we're at half an hour, so I think that's my time. Hopefully we've covered everything you want to cover, but certainly if you want questions now or at the end, or feel free to reach out to me later, and I'd be happy to sit down with anybody on a call and just answer some questions and be a bit of a sounding board. So thanks for your time.
Terry, thank you very much. It's, I can't tell you the number of times I've seen things go wrong with skeletons in the closet that you kind of just want to sweep under the rug, but it's never worth it. I've seen that happen to a few too many entrepreneurs. So good words in terms of openness and transparency once you're already dancing together and you've got the process underway, and certainly good advice in terms of getting everything proactively put together, because again,
I'll just add, there's very few dumb buyers out there, so don't assume they're stupid.
absolutely.
My screen.
Yeah, so we're gonna move on now to my good friend here, Howie Honeyman from Forward Water, and Howie, you should be able to take over the screen share now, to talk a little bit about Forward Water and where you're at and what you're looking for. I've known this company for quite a while. We've had some shared folks involved with Wayne from Bioindustrial Innovations Canada and a few others. So take it away, Howie.
You can hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, you're good.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for Brian. Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me a chance to present where we are with Forward. And I appreciate everybody cutting out a little time of their day to join us here at the CTN webinar. And hopefully I can provide you with something interesting. So Forward Water is a startup company that is developing a wastewater treatment technology. Now, what's really important is what we're going to do is we're going to treat wastewater that typically cannot be treated today. Today, wastewater from manufacturing processes that cannot be treated is sent down for deep well disposal. It is buried, burned, or boiled. So you either evaporate it, put it down a well, or you actually, in some cases, you incinerate it. What we want to do is we want to take that wastewater and we wanted to create a dry factory as an example. We want to take that factory to be built, purpose built, takes in a load of water, and then we find a way to recycle that water over and over and over again at a relatively low cost compared to the traditional disposal techniques. That's what we're here to do. We know that there's a market in here. This is a projected growth of wastewater treatment, notably tertiary wastewater treatment. Will grow to about $2 billion inside the US by 2025 for equipment. So that's just the equipment sales that we're looking at. And we're trying to take part of that market sector. We also know that forward osmosis, which is the type of technology that we're using, is suitable for a wide range of different sectors, everything from landfill leachate, textile production, zero liquid discharge process trains, cooling water. And we know that forward osmosis in general is already being accepted into the marketplace, and it's growing and used in places such as desalination for reuse and fracking wastewater treatment. And we see this as an opportunity for us, but we're a little bit different. So overall, what we're going to do is we're going to take a large amount of source wastewater, and instead of sending for expensive disposal, we're going to compress that water or that waste into a small volume that goes for final disposal, thereby saving a lot of cash compared to traditional disposal costs, and return clean water back into operations for reuse. And we're doing this on waste streams that cannot be treated by typical technologies today. So how does it work? On the left-hand side, we've got a membrane process, and we bring the wastewater in contact with the membrane, and that water in that contaminated waste spontaneously travels across the membrane where all the contaminant materials are rejected and left into on the feed side of the wastewater. How does that happen? It happens because on the opposite side of the membrane, we've got a proprietary draw solution. This is a highly engineered, well-controlled aqueous solution that contains a draw solute, and up to 70% of that solution is salt. So it creates a massive osmotic potential to spontaneously pull the water across with no applied pressure. And this is really similar to just putting sugar on strawberries. When you put sugar on strawberries, you see the water come out of across the membrane, the strawberry skin. That's exactly what we're doing it, but we're doing it in a very well-controlled manner. Once that process is complete, you've now pulled the water into your draw solution and diluted your draw solution. The next step is what we call the back end of the process. We can, with small amounts of heat, we can decompose our proprietary salt material into two gases. And as it forms a gas, it simply bubbles out of the water, leaving behind clean, potable quality water. Then we go back and we capture those emitted gases. And this is just like soda water going flat. We capture those gases, recombine them in a small amount of water in a concentrated form, and bring them back into the front end of the process. So what we've created is a way to treat wastewater using low energy membrane processes coupled to a chemical process that in itself is low energy, but also closed loop. So there's no material consumable. There's very little energy required to drive the regeneration process, and relying on a spontaneous separation of the water from the waste stream. Because we're not using any high temperatures, because we're not using any high pressures, you use standard equipment. We're basically off-the-shelf components are arranged in a novel fashion. And it's either composed of standard grades of stainless steel and plastic. So our capital expenses are quite low. And what this allows us to do is treat wastewater that cannot be treated by typical or established membrane processes such as reverse osmosis, and eliminates the need for high intensity thermal processes, which are expensive and produce a large amount of greenhouse gas, or the more traditional method of simply shipping it to a disposal hole and sending it down well. What we've done recently over the last number of years is we've not only done this at laboratory scale, proven out all the science, but we've scaled it up to prove out the engineering. We've run a trial out in Alberta using true industrial waste streams sourced from the oil and gas field at 15,000 liters a day capacity, and showed that the technology doesn't only work on the science side, but it works on the engineering scale-up side. And this is an example. We took a feed waste stream on the left-hand side that is known as a refinery waste from Alberta, activities out in Alberta. We removed over 70% of the volume of that waste as clean water, and ultimately compressed the final waste volume to 30% of the original incoming volume that would be sent for final disposal. We have created an engineering facility, or built an engineering facility in Sarnia, Ontario, where we do our work down. We've got an engineering skid there that allows us to do application studies and ongoing process development. It's also turned into a way to take potential clients' feed, test it, get some real scalable information, and design plants for them. And here's an example of somebody, a marine terminal operator, whose main business is onshoring and offshoring liquids from ships. They reuse those tanks for a variety of liquids in their washdown activities, going from one storage material to another storage material. They create a waste stream. Globally, this particular company has 34 million cubic meters of storage, all of which produces this type of waste stream. And we were able to take 420 kilograms of this washdown waste and compress it to a final volume of 3.2 kilograms. So we think that was a fairly reasonable outcome and demonstration of the type of technology that we're bringing to bear on these issues. And recently what we've done is we've designed a commercial plant ready for fabrication and ready for delivery to a site. And what our ask is right now, and what we're looking for, is we're looking for partners who are willing to participate in the first commercial installation of a 50 cubic meter per day capacity treatment plant. And that's kind of the very quick story of where we are. Of course, we're always looking for investment and potential income and money to continue our business. This is a list of the team right now, as well as a list of supporters throughout the ecosystem, as well as some partners that we're engaged in doing some commercial work with. And that is the quick tour of Forward Water today.
Great, Howie. Thank you very much. I have a couple questions here, but
Sure.
I'm going to be I'm going to ask take the liberty and ask the first one. Who's your ideal? Who is your ideal first partner? What does that look like to you?
So yeah, I get that question on occasionally. It's a good question. In a perfect world, we're working with somebody who's got a consistent on-site production of a waste stream. So somebody who's manufacturing something day in, day out. They've got a problematic waste that's expensive to dispose of, and we can plop our equipment on that site, tie into their facilities, and really return clean water back to their own operations, save them the disposal costs. And the win there is it's consistent. The feed water into our system is always going to be the same day to day, and there's an ongoing need.
And those disposal costs really drive that the economics of the process.
Yeah. So here's the thing that you learn when you start immersing yourself into this business. Some industrial waste, and I'll take pharmaceutical waste streams from pharmaceutical manufacturing, $450 to $750 a cubic meter to dispose of. So let's imagine it cost me $50, and I'm just going to hang that out there, to treat that water and reduce it by when pharmaceutical waste, we've shown we can reduce by 90%. So you're only sending 10% for final disposal and eliminating 90% of that $450 a cubic meter cost for a price of $50. So the economics can be very attractive. I think that the misunderstood thing out there is that waste, chemical waste, is very, very expensive to discard.
Absolutely. So we've got a couple other questions coming in fast and furious here. Quickly, I don't know. Can you talk about the membrane cleaning system to be used? Can it be the typical sort of membrane cleaning system? What's the lifespan of the your type of membrane versus
Yeah.
some of the others?
So the figure of merit, or that is quoted out there, forward osmosis is a very gentle membrane technique, right? In reverse osmosis, you're pushing stuff through the membrane almost physically using pressure.
Yeah.
Forward osmosis uses a passive pulling process, or absorption process almost, into the draw side, and the flow pattern is cross flow. All that adds up to is that we see a service life that is 3 to 4 times longer than reverse osmosis membranes, as an example.
And just going off that, another question here. Cost comparison versus reverse osmosis, evaporation or crystallization. How do you stack up to some of the other
Well,
options?
reverse osmosis is not what we're competing against. Those are relatively easy waste streams to. What we're competing against is evaporative techniques where you're boiling water. What we do is we boil gas.
Mhm.
You're going to see 10 times reduced energy input needs compared to evaporating water, which is heavily. So you can just do the economics based on electricity costs to provide that much heat. So that's essentially what we're competing against. The other thing that we're competing against, as horrible as it sounds, is transportation and waste well disposal, where
Yeah.
that formerly clean water is sent down a well, never to come back again. And if it does, it's going to carry all those toxics with it. So those are the real comparisons.
And hope like heck that well never cracks and the lining is strong and everything else. Otherwise,
Absolutely correct. Absolutely
yeah,
correct.
yeah, dealing with solids much easier. Have a comment and a question from Lyle Clark. Hi, Lyle.
Hey,
He
Lyle.
says, "Yeah, great progress, Howie." But his question is, what is the net savings per meter cubed with 30% volume reduction? Just rough numbers. Can you give a
So
sense?
yeah, so it's 70% volume reduction. It's
70%.
30% final waste disposal in the particular case that I put out. So it depends on application to application. So the application that we were looking at for the refinery water was a it's a difficult number to ferret out, but there's about a 50% savings overall compared to the traditional handling of that particular fluid.
Okay.
So you're saving half of what your typical costs are.
Okay. Okay.
It,
Um, and I'm just scanning here. There's another one in here. Bear with me. Um, what types of membranes do you use? Are they homemade, or do you use some sort of somebody else's commercial
yeah.
membranes, or what are you using?
Yeah, it was a big risk actually when we launched the business. We decided that we would use commercial membranes that were available, made by third parties. At the time, there were very few. About over the last 5 years, about four other membrane producers have entered the market, including large companies such as Coke Membranes is now providing forward osmosis
Hmm.
offerings for the membranes. What we do is we use the best cost performance analysis membrane for each application. We're not tied into using a specific membrane. And so we use what works best in a particular application. We have our favorites, we have our go-tos, and we have companies that respond faster to us than others. So
Yep.
it's interesting to be the person who's trying to be dated sometimes. So yeah.
Always a good thing. I guess one last question for me. I don't see any others that have popped up yet. If there are, please just log them in the chat or the Q&A. I'm trolling both of them here with the help of Paul Connor, MC in the background. One last question for me. You mentioned that you're raising money. I know that is in clean tech that's almost a perpetual state of the union. What does that look like for you right now? What gets you to the next big milestone? And what is that milestone?
Well, the real next big milestone is what we've reduced the engineering risk and the scale up risk, and so where
Yeah.
we're really at is we're at the cusp of being able to commercialize. We can deliver a plant to an end user inside 3 months if we can have a PO placed. Now, I'm going to say that scenario is pretty straightforward. It's almost unlikely to happen. But what we need is we need a commercial structure that gets us to that first commercial installation. That could be install a side stream pilot plant at that scale, and if successful, based on success criteria, it leads to a larger plant. But
Yep.
that's really our next real thing. Now, we have licensed the technology to a provider in India.
Okay.
That particular provider engineering company in India has got 1,200 cubic meters of commercial pipeline. So per cubic meter, they've got 1,200 cubic meters of total customers that are in pipeline, and they want to have 3 plants on the ground in Q1 2021. So the uptake in the right area is really rapid.
Great. Great. All right. Well, I recognize some of the names that are here from the investor community, so we'll make any connections that we can on that side. I do see there are another couple of questions here that just popped up. Beyond wastewater, are there other industrial applications? I know somebody somewhere in here mentioned lithium, for example, which I guess is wastewater. But are there other applications?
Yeah.
We'll start with
So
that.
third startup. One thing I really like to do when I'm moving stuff from the lab into commercial is don't be a one-trick pony. 2 ways to look at the concentration. You can concentrate stuff that you want to throw away, or you can concentrate stuff you want to keep, right? And so what we've done is we've actually manipulated the chemistry in the background to be suitable for food concentrates. So what that allows you to do, and this is typical for forward osmosis, is it allows you to concentrate food products without altering their taste profile. So what you can do is you can concentrate fruit juice as an example, and you get the taste of Tropicana for the price of frozen concentrate. And that's essentially what you do. Most concentration processes are thermal. They erode the taste and
Yep.
aroma of products. Forward osmosis preserves those. But in traditional forward osmosis, it creates a secondary waste stream, which takes away from the value of what you're doing. We have a regenerative waste stream. We eliminate that problem. So we're looking at food and beverage concentrates. Forward osmosis concentrated coffee will blow your mind. Like it is a really different product.
There are days these days that I could definitely use some of that, and I can just see you there with the palette testing that out. So no, I would love to, and I've learned something new today because I had not appreciated the fact that you can also use it, invert it for concentrations, and I've known the company for a
Yeah.
while, so
And we're
thank you.
looking, the lithium question is well placed too. We're looking at possible ways of easing the lithium capture process from brines that are being
Yeah.
sourced out of Alberta, dead wells out in Alberta, as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got one last, maybe 2 last questions here. What techniques do you commonly use to mitigate the membrane fouling, treating different feed solutions? So how are you dealing with
Yeah.
the fouling?
So this is again being a supplier relationship with the membrane community. I ask them for all their cleaning protocols, given a certain thing, make them do the work. But you're really looking at standard processes. A slight after a certain amount of service time, you cycle through it a quick caustic wash, and they clean quite readily because none of the contaminants that are fouling the membrane have been driven into the membrane using pressure. So they're gently lying on the surface and they can be actually removed quite easily.
Okay, very good. All right. Other than a comment from somebody that you might be able to guess, asking whether you can concentrate Chambly, some champagne in there.
Indeed, we have done the alcoholic beverages and the I have tasted the white wine that comes out of the concentrate. It's really quite good. Very different experience.
you may have to represent when we do our next at some point in person Clean Tech North session.
I'll look
if
into
that's the
that.
case.
I will definitely make that consideration for sure.
Great. Thank you very much, Howie. Thank you very much for joining us today, giving us an update on what you're doing. It's been a while since I had an update, honestly. So it was a good update for me. Thank you very much to I'll put them up on our screen here, possibly. Thank you very much to Terry as well, for a little bit of insight into the M&A process and just the level of preparation that needs to be put in place for getting everything ready before going out to market to sell a company. It is a lot of work, but it can really make the difference between having a punt or a single base hit and a 10 bag exit. So thank you, Terry, for speaking to that a little bit. And thank you to all our sponsors. I want to say thank you to RBC, EDC, Goodman's, City of Toronto, Startup Toronto, and CSI Climate Ventures, and of course Flow Ventures. We will likely be having an event in December. We're just working on the timing, so stay tuned. And if you have any questions for Paul or I, or for the speakers, please feel free to reach out. Until then, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.